The dust swirled across the parched Wyoming street as Zoe Montgomery stood frozen on the boardwalk, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. 5 years had passed since she'd last seen that silhouette tall and unmistakable against the setting sun. The same weathered Stetson tilted at that familiar angle, yet she'd no Finn Calloway anywhere, even with half a decade's worth of new scars etched into his handsome face. It was 1876, and the small town of Clearwater had changed since he'd ridden away, promising to return with enough money to build them a future. Zoe had stopped believing in that promise 3 years ago, somewhere between receiving his last letter and burying her father alone. "It cannot be," she whispered, her fingers tightening around the basket of supplies she'd just purchased from Henderson's general store. The man dismounting his horse in front of the saloon across the street paused, as if sensing her gaze, and slowly turned. Their eyes met across the dusty thoroughfare, and time collapsed between them. Zoe felt the blood drain from her face. She took one step backward, then another, before turning and fleeing down the street, her skirts gathered in her trembling hands, leaving Finn standing alone in the middle of the road with his hat now clutched against his chest. The small house at the edge of town had been her sanctuary since her father's passing. Zoe burst through the door, setting her basket down with shaking hands before leaning against the wall. Memories she'd worked so hard to bury came flooding back, promises whispered under starlight, passionate embraces behind her father's barn, and the soul-crushing ache when month after month passed with no word from the man who had sworn his love was eternal. A gentle knock at the door made her jump. She knew who stood on the other side before she even crossed the room. "Zoe," Finn's voice was deeper than she remembered, roughened by years and distance. "Please, just let me explain." "There is nothing to explain," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "You made your choice years ago." "I never chose to leave you," he said, his voice dropping. "I never stopped trying to get back to you." Zoe's hand rested on the doorknob, her forehead pressed against the weathered wood. On the other side, Finn waited, his heart in his throat. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times during the long nights under western skies, but now that it was here, words failed him. "5 years, Finn," she finally said, opening the door just enough to see his face. He looked older, his once boyish features now carved into those of a man who had seen hardship. A thin scar ran along his jaw that hadn't been there before. 5 years without a word for the last 3. "I wrote every month," he said, his blue eyes intense with sincerity. "I swear it on my life, Zoe. When the letters stopped coming from you, I feared the worst." "The worst?" She let out a bitter laugh. "The worst was standing at the stage depot every week for 2 years, watching for a letter that never came. The worst was explaining to my dying father why the man who promised to marry his daughter had disappeared without a trace." Finn's face paled. "Your father, Thomas, is gone," Zoe nodded, fighting back tears. 2 years ago, pneumonia took him quickly, at least." "I didn't know," Finn whispered, his voice breaking. "God, Zoe, I would have come back. I tried to come back." "Yet here you stand 5 years later," she said, gripping the door as if it could shield her from the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "What do you want from me now, Finn?" "A chance," he said simply. "A chance to explain what happened, a chance to make things right." Zoe looked at him, really looked at him. Behind the new hardness in his eyes, she could still see traces of the young man who had stolen her heart when she was just 18. The man who had promised her the world and then vanished into it. "I have built a life without you," she said quietly. "I had to." "I know," he nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "And I wouldn't ask for a moment of your time if I didn't think you deserved the truth." The truth. Such a simple word for what must be a complicated story. Zoe hesitated, then stepped back from the doorway. "You have until sundown," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Then I want you gone from Clearwater, for good this time." Finn entered her home with the cautious reverence of a man stepping into a church. His eyes took in the modest furnishings, the dried wildflowers on the table, the patchwork quilt draped over the small sofa touches that were undeniably Zoe. "You always did make anywhere feel like home," he said softly. Zoe busied herself putting away her purchases, needing the distraction. "Say what you came to say, Finn." He removed his hat, running a hand through his sun-lightened brown hair. "I went to Colorado like I planned. The silver mine was everything they said it would be. Within a year, I'd saved enough to start thinking about coming back, about the house we'd talked about building." Zoe's hands stilled on a jar of preserves. They had spent countless hours discussing the home they would share, 2 stories with a wide porch, room for children to grow. "I wrote to you every month," he continued. "Told you about everything, the work, the money I was saving, how much I missed you." "I received those letters," she acknowledged. "For the first 2 years." Finn nodded, his expression darkening. "In my last letter to you, I told you I was coming home, had bought passage on a stage leaving the following week." Zoe turned to him, confusion crossing her features. "I never received that letter." "The stage was attacked," Finn said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Comanche raiders. They killed the driver and 2 passengers, shot me and left me for dead by the side of the trail." Zoe's hand flew to her mouth. "Finn." "A Shoshone hunting party found me 3 days later, more dead than alive. They took me back to their village. The chief's daughter was skilled with medicine. It took months before I could even stand again." "But after you recovered," Zoe pressed, "why didn't you come back then?" Finn's jaw tightened. "The bullet shattered my leg. For almost a year I couldn't walk without help. By the time I could ride again, the letters I'd been sending to you were being returned. I feared you'd moved on, maybe even married. Then I heard about troubles with land grabbers in Wyoming territory. I worried something might have happened to you and your father." Zoe sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "We moved from the old homestead after the drought in '73, came into town. Father sold the ranch to pay his debts. When I finally made it back to where your ranch had been, a stranger was living there. He didn't know where you'd gone. I've spent the last 2 years searching for you, Zoe, following rumors and whispers, taking odd jobs to finance my search. I never stopped looking." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Zoe had spent years hardening her heart against this man, convincing herself he had abandoned their love for adventure or riches. The possibility that he had been fighting to return to her all this time was almost too much to bear. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, even as doubt crept into her resolve. "How do I know this isn't just another pretty tale to ease your conscience?" Finn reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, worn leather pouch. With reverent fingers, he untied the string and emptied the contents into his palm, dozens of folded papers, yellowed with age and worn at the creases from constant handling. "Your letters," he said, extending his hand so she could see them. "Every one you sent me. I carried them through fever and pain, read them by firelight when I thought I might never see you again. They kept me alive, Zoe." She recognized her own handwriting on the exposed edges. Letters filled with hope and love, then questions and worry as time passed. The last ones, she knew, contained thinly veiled desperation as she began to believe he had abandoned her. "And this," Finn said, reaching again into his pocket to produce a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He carefully unfolded it to reveal a simple gold band. "I bought this before I left Colorado. I've kept it with me every day since, waiting to place it on your finger." Zoe's vision blurred with tears. The ring was exactly what she would have chosen, a simple band with a delicate pattern etched around its circumference. Nothing flashy or extravagant, just like the love they had once shared. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything now," Finn replied, carefully rewrapping the ring. "I know I've lost the right to walk back into your life and expect everything to be the same. 5 years is a long time, Zoe. We've both changed." "Yes," she agreed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "We have." The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words and lost time. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that filtered through Zoe's curtains. "Sundown approaches," Finn said, gathering his hat. "I gave my word I would leave if that's what you want." Zoe stood, her emotions warring within her. The anger and hurt of 5 years couldn't be erased in a single afternoon, yet neither could she deny the spark that still flickered between them, fanned by his unexpected return and the knowledge that he had never willingly abandoned her. "Where will you go?" she asked. Finn shrugged. "I've taken a room at the boarding house for now. I have some money saved. Thought I might look for work around here." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "Unless you truly want me gone from Clearwater." The request in his eyes was clear he would honor her wishes, but he was asking for time. Time to prove himself. Time to see if what they once had could be rebuilt from the ashes. "Clearwater is a free town," Zoe said carefully. "You have as much right to be here as anyone." A glimmer of hope lit Finn's face. "Then I'll stay, for a while at least." He moved toward the door, stopping with his hand on the knob. "I don't expect forgiveness, Zoe, not yet. But I hope someday you might find it in your heart to believe that not a day went by when I didn't think of you, when I didn't try to find my way back to you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. "Good night, Finn." After he left, Zoe stood in the growing darkness of her small home, feeling as if the foundations of her carefully reconstructed life had been shaken to their core. She moved to the window, watching as Finn's tall figure made its way down the dusty street toward the town center, his shoulders squared against the weight of years lost. She had believed he would never return, had built her life around that certainty. Now that he had proven her wrong, Zoe wasn't sure if she should feel hope or fear at the prospect of reopening wounds she had fought so hard to heal. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn day that made the Wyoming territory feel like the most beautiful place on earth. Zoe had slept poorly, her dreams filled with fragments of the past mixed with the reality of Finn's return. She dressed carefully for her job at the town's small schoolhouse, where she had been teaching for the past 3 years. The position had been her salvation after her father's death, providing not only income but purpose in the wake of her grief. As she walked the familiar path to the schoolhouse, Zoe couldn't help scanning the street for a glimpse of Finn. Part of her was relieved when she didn't see him. She needed time to sort through the tumult of emotions his return had stirred. The school day passed in a blur of arithmetic lessons and reading circles. The children sensed her distraction, but were kind enough not to comment, even when she accidentally called young Timothy by the wrong name twice. As she dismissed the children for the day, Zoe noticed a small commotion near the livery stable across the street. A crowd had gathered to watch as a magnificent black stallion reared and fought against the ropes holding him in the corral. "Wild Mustang," Mrs. Peterson said, appearing at Zoe's side as she locked the schoolhouse door. "Brought in yesterday by that new fellow in town. Quite the horseman, they say." Zoe's heart skipped. "New fellow? Tall drink of water with those blue eyes you could drown in," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "Word is he's looking to settle here. Offered to help Sam Jenkins break those new horses he brought up from Texas." Before Zoe could respond, a cheer went up from the crowd. She turned to see Finn inside the corral, approaching the agitated stallion with slow, confident movements. The horse snorted and pawed at the ground, but Finn continued his careful advance, speaking words too low for the onlookers to hear. "Would you look at that?" Mrs. Peterson murmured. "Man's got away with beasts, that's certain." Zoe couldn't tear her eyes away as Finn slowly gained the stallion's trust, eventually stroking its muzzle with gentle hands. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work the patience, the quiet strength, the complete focus. It reminded her of how he had courted her, with that same deliberate care and unwavering attention. "Well, I best be getting home before Henry thinks I've run off with the butcher, Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "That husband of mine gets mighty jealous for a man of 65. Zoe nodded absently, her attention still fixed on the scene at the livery. As if sensing her gaze, Finn looked up, their eyes meeting across the distance. Even from here, she could see his expression soften, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She should turn away, continue home as she had planned. Instead, Zoe found herself walking toward the corral, drawn by a force she couldn't name. The crowd had begun to disperse, leaving Finn alone with the now calm stallion. He stroked the animal's neck, murmuring praises as Zoe approached. "He's beautiful," she said, stopping at the fence. Finn nodded. "Reminds me of that mare your father had, the one nobody could ride but you." "Starlight," Zoe said, surprised he remembered. "She was something special." "As I recall, so was her rider." There was warmth in his voice, but no presumption. He was offering a memory, nothing more. Zoe studied the magnificent horse. "Does he have a name?" "Not yet," Finn replied. "Thought I'd get to know him better first. Names should mean something." A comfortable silence fell between them as they both watched the stallion, now contentedly exploring his new surroundings. "You always did have a gift with horses," Zoe finally said. "Father used to say you could charm the shoes off a mule if you set your mind to it." Finn laughed, the sound startlingly familiar after so many years. "Thomas had a way with words. I miss him." "Me too," Zoe said softly. Sam Jenkins approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'll be damned, Calloway. Haven't seen anyone gentle a wild one that fast in years. Job's yours if you want it." Finn glanced at Zoe before answering. "I appreciate that, Mr. Jenkins. I plan to stay around for a while." "Good man," Jenkins clapped him on the shoulder. "Report tomorrow at sunup." "We've got 8 more just like this one that need breaking." After Jenkins walked away, Finn turned back to Zoe. "Looks like I have employment." "So it seems," she replied, suddenly aware of how easy it had been to fall into conversation with him, as if the years apart had momentarily disappeared. "Would you?" Finn hesitated, then pressed on. "Would you allow me to walk you home, Miss Montgomery?" The formal address made her smile despite herself. "I suppose that would be acceptable, Mr. Calloway." He quickly secured the stallion in a stall and grabbed his hat. As they walked side by side down the main street, Zoe was acutely conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk who had known her as the woman abandoned by her beau years ago. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them," Finn replied. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about by week's end." "You don't know Clearwater very well," Zoe said. "This will keep them entertained for months." They had reached her small house sooner than she expected. Finn stopped at the gate, making no move to enter her yard without invitation. "Thank you for allowing me to accompany you," he said formally. Zoe hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Why horses, Finn? I thought you went to Colorado to find silver." "I did," he answered, "and I found enough to set aside for the future. But after everything that happened, I realized I needed something more honest than mining, something I understood." He glanced toward the distant mountains. "My father raised horses in Kentucky before the war took him. It's in my blood, I suppose." The mention of Finn's father, who had died at Shiloh when Finn was just 12, reminded Zoe of the many nights they had shared their pasts, their dreams, their fears. She had known this man once, perhaps better than anyone. "Will you be at the harvest dance on Saturday?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. Finn's eyes brightened. "I hadn't planned on it, but I could certainly attend if there's a reason to." "Mrs. Peterson mentioned it earlier," Zoe said quickly, not wanting him to read too much into her query. "The whole town will be there." "Then I wouldn't want to miss a Clearwater tradition," he replied, his smile gentle. "Good evening, Zoe." As she watched him walk away, his stride long and confident, Zoe wondered what she was doing. Opening the door to the past could only lead to more pain, couldn't it? Yet something about seeing Finn today, not just hearing his explanation, but witnessing the man he had become, had stirred emotions she thought long buried. The next few days passed in a rhythm of school lessons and careful encounters. Zoe would see Finn around town at the general store, exiting the bank, leading a newly broken horse down the main street for its owner. Each time, he would tip his hat respectfully, sometimes stopping for a brief conversation if she seemed receptive. He never pushed, never presumed. It was as if he understood that trust, once broken, could only be rebuilt slowly, one careful piece at a time. By Friday evening, the town was abuzz with preparations for the harvest dance. Lanterns were strung across the town square, and the local carpenter had constructed a wooden dance floor in front of the courthouse. Musicians were tuning their instruments as Zoe helped arrange refreshment tables with the other women of the town. "That Calloway fellow bought a new shirt at Frederick's store yesterday," Martha Wilson informed her as they laid out napkins. "Paid extra for rush tailoring, must be looking to impress someone." Zoe concentrated on straightening the silverware. "Mr. Calloway's personal matters are none of my concern, Martha." "Now, Zoe Montgomery, you can't fool me," the older woman chided gently. "Half the town has seen how that man looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, like a man who's found water after crossing a desert." "It's complicated," Zoe said softly. Martha patted her hand. "Love always is, dear. But take it from someone who's been married 30 years. When a man looks at a woman the way that Cowboy looks at you, it's worth hearing what he has to say." Zoe had no response to that. She excused herself to fetch more tablecloths, her mind turning over Martha's words. Was she being too cautious, too unforgiving? Or was she simply protecting herself from the possibility of being hurt again? Saturday evening arrived, and Zoe dressed with more care than she had intended. The blue dress had been an extravagance purchased with her first teacher's salary, and she had worn it only once before. The color brought out the deep brown of her eyes and complemented her chestnut hair, which she wore partly up, with soft curls framing her face. The dance was already in full swing when she arrived. Couples twirled across the wooden floor while children darted between groups of adults, playing elaborate games of tag. The atmosphere was festive, with the scent of apple cider and cinnamon hanging in the crisp autumn air. Zoe greeted her students and their parents, accepting compliments on her appearance with modest thanks. All the while, her eyes scanned the crowd, looking for one particular face. "He's by the punch bowl," Mrs. Peterson whispered in her ear, making Zoe jump. "And my word, doesn't he clean up nicely?" Following the older woman's gaze, Zoe's breath caught. Finn stood talking with Sam Jenkins and the town doctor, his tall frame outfitted in dark trousers and a new blue shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked younger somehow, more like the man she had fallen in love with years ago. As if sensing her attention, Finn glanced up. When he saw her, his conversation faltered mid-sentence. Even from across the square, Zoe could see the appreciation in his eyes, the slight parting of his lips in surprise at her appearance. He excused himself from his companions and began making his way toward her, weaving through the crowd with unhurried confidence. Zoe's heart beat faster with each step he took. "Miss Montgomery," he said, stopping before her with a slight bow, "you look absolutely beautiful this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she replied, grateful that her voice remained steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "You look quite handsome yourself." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Finn held out his hand. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Zoe hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I would be delighted." As he led her to the dance floor, Zoe was keenly aware of the eyes following them, the whispers behind raised hands. She had been a fixture in Clearwater for years now, her story of abandonment well known. This public acknowledgement of Finn's return would set tongues wagging for weeks. But when his hand settled respectfully at her waist and he guided her into the waltz, the rest of the world seemed to fade. They moved together with the same natural harmony they had shared years ago, turning gracefully among the other couples. "You remember the last time we danced?" Finn asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Zoe nodded. "The spring social before you left. You stepped on Widow Hargrove's toes and spilled punch on the mayor's wife." Finn's laugh was warm and genuine. "I was so nervous that night." Had the ring in my pocket, was planning to propose under that big cottonwood by the creek afterward. You did, Zoe faltered slightly in her steps, surprised by the revelation. I never knew. Lost my nerve at the last minute, he admitted. Thought I should have more to offer you than dreams and promises. That's why I decided to try my luck in Colorado first. His expression grew somber. One of many decisions I've come to regret. The music continued around them, but Zoe barely heard it. She had always believed Finn left primarily seeking adventure, with their future as a secondary consideration. The knowledge that he had been ready to propose, that his journey had been motivated by a desire to provide for her, shifted something in her understanding of their past. Life rarely follows the paths we plan, she said finally. No, he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. But sometimes it leads us back to where we're meant to be. The dance ended and Finn reluctantly released her. Before he could speak again, Mayor Simmons approached, his wife in tow. Miss Montgomery, a pleasure as always, the mayor said jovially. And Mr. Calloway, I understand you've been making quite an impression at Jenkins' livery. Just doing what I know, sir, Finn replied respectfully. Well, Clearwater can always use skilled men, the mayor continued. I understand you're looking to settle here. Finn's eyes flickered briefly to Zoe. That's my hope, yes. Excellent, excellent. We should discuss the possibility of expanding the livery. Town's growing, need for good horses increasing. Perhaps you'd stop by my office next week. As the conversation continued, Zoe found herself watching Finn interact with the town's leading citizen. He was poised and articulate, showing a maturity and confidence that the younger Finn had sometimes lacked. This was a man who had faced hardship and emerged stronger, who knew his own mind and capabilities. The evening progressed with more dancing, more conversations. Zoe and Finn were not always together. She had her obligations as a respected teacher to socialize with parents and town elders, while he was repeatedly drawn into discussions with men interested in horses or tales of his travels. Yet they remained aware of each other across the square, their eyes meeting occasionally with small, private smiles. As the celebration began to wind down, Finn appeared at her side once more. May I escort you home? The night was clear and cool as they walked the quiet streets away from the town square. Stars blanketed the sky above them, brilliant in the mountain air. I had forgotten how beautiful the nights are here, Finn said, gazing upward. In Colorado, the mining camps were always full of smoke and noise. You could barely see the stars. I look at them often, Zoe admitted. They make me feel less alone somehow. Finn was quiet for a moment before speaking again. Zoe, I know I have no right to ask this, but in the years I was gone, was there ever anyone else? For you, I mean. The question was asked gently, without jealousy or accusation, merely a man trying to understand the life she had lived in his absence. Frank Wilson courted me for a time about 2 years ago, she answered honestly. He's a good man, kind and steady, owns the cattle ranch north of town. I know who he is, Finn said, his voice carefully neutral. Jenkins mentioned him, said he raises fine horses as well as cattle. Zoe nodded. He proposed after 6 months of courting. I turned him down. Finn's step faltered slightly. May I ask why? They had reached her gate, and Zoe turned to face him, the moonlight silvering his features. Because when he kissed me, I felt nothing, no spark, no quickening of the heart. She took a deep breath. I told myself it was because I wasn't meant for love, that perhaps I was better suited to independence. But the truth is, I was comparing every man to a ghost. The admission hung between them, more revealing than she had intended. Finn's expression was unreadable in the dim light. And now that the ghost has returned, he asked softly. Zoe shook her head. I don't know, Finn. I'm not the same woman you left behind. That girl who believed in fairy tale endings is gone. I wouldn't want you to be unchanged, he said. 5 years shapes a person, changes them. The woman you've become independent, respected, strong, she's someone I'm eager to know. His sincerity was palpable, and Zoe found herself responding to it despite her reservations. It will take time. Time is something I have, Finn replied, and patience I've learned the hard way. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and when she didn't pull away, he gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Good night, Zoe Montgomery, thank you for the dance. Long after he had disappeared down the street, Zoe stood at her gate, her fingers touching the spot where his hand had brushed her face, wondering if she was brave enough or foolish enough to risk her heart a second time. The following weeks brought a rhythm to their renewed acquaintance. Finn established himself at the livery, his skill with horses quickly making him indispensable to Sam Jenkins. Word spread about his gentle but effective methods, and soon ranchers from miles around were bringing their most difficult animals for him to train. Zoe continued her teaching, but now her walks home often included an accidental encounter with Finn, leading to conversations that grew increasingly comfortable. Sometimes he would bring her small gifts, a wildflower he had spotted on his morning ride, a smooth river stone with unusual markings, once even a book of poetry he had purchased from a traveling salesman. I remember you loved Wordsworth, he said when he presented the volume. Thought you might enjoy this. Such thoughtful gestures, offered without expectation, began to slowly rebuild the bridge between them. They spoke of everyday matters, at first the weather, town gossip, her students' progress. Gradually, they ventured into more personal territory, filling in the blank spaces of the years apart. Finn told her of his time with the Shoshone, of the chief's daughter who had saved his life and taught him their language and customs. He described the months of painful recovery, the night terrors that still occasionally plagued him from the stage attack. He spoke of the odd jobs he had taken while searching for her cattle drives, ranch work, even a brief stint as a deputy in a Colorado town. In turn, Zoe shared stories of her father's final years, how they had struggled after losing the ranch but found a different kind of contentment in town life. She told him about her decision to become a teacher, the satisfaction she found in helping shape young minds. She even confided her brief courtship with Frank Wilson, and how his proposal had forced her to confront the reality that her heart still belonged elsewhere. One crisp November afternoon, nearly a month after Finn's return, they walked along the creek that bordered the town's eastern edge. The water gurgled peacefully over stones, the cottonwood trees now bare of leaves but still majestic against the blue sky. "Do you remember this spot?" Finn asked, stopping beneath the largest tree. Zoe smiled. "Of course. We carved our initials somewhere around here, didn't we?" Finn stepped closer to the massive trunk, his fingers tracing the bark until he found what he was looking for. "Here." Zoe moved beside him, her breath catching as she saw the carving, weathered but still legible, FC plus ZM, surrounded by a crude heart. Below it, a date May 15, 1871, the day they had first declared their love for each other. "I can't believe it's still here," she murmured, reaching out to touch the rough indentations. "Some marks are meant to last," Finn said quietly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Zoe felt the last of her resistance beginning to crumble. The man before her had never stopped loving her, had fought his way back to her against impossible odds. The years of doubt and pain couldn't be erased, but perhaps they could be understood as part of a journey that had ultimately led them back to each other. "Finn," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. 3 riders appeared on the path, moving at a brisk trot. As they drew closer, Zoe recognized Frank Wilson in the lead, his expression hardening when he spotted Finn. "Miss Montgomery," Frank greeted her with a tip of his hat, deliberately ignoring Finn. "Beautiful day for a walk." "It is indeed, Mr. Wilson," Zoe replied politely. "I believe you know Mr. Calloway." Frank's jaw tightened. "We've met. Jenkins introduced us when I brought in that new stallion last week." He turned to his companions. "This is the fellow I mentioned, thinks he can gentle thunderbolt within the month." One of the other men scoffed. "That devil horse has thrown every hand on the Wilson spread, killed a man over in Johnson County, they say." "I've seen worse," Finn said calmly. "Your stallion has spirit, Mr. Wilson, but he's not mean, just needs the right approach." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Bold words, care to put money behind them. 500 says you can't ride him clean around the town square by Christmas Day." Zoe tensed at the challenge. $500 was more than most men in the territory saw in a year. She knew Frank was deliberately setting an impossible task, hoping to either humiliate Finn or drive him from town with a debt he couldn't pay. "Frank, that's," she began. "I accept," Finn interrupted, his voice level. "With one condition. When I succeed, instead of paying me, you donate the money to the school building fund Miss Montgomery has been collecting for." Surprise flickered across Frank's face, quickly replaced by determination. "Fine, but when you fail, you pay me the same amount. Or leave Clearwater for good if you can't cover it." "Deal." Finn extended his hand, which Frank shook firmly. After the riders departed, Zoe turned to Finn with concern. "Why did you agree to that? Thunderbolt has injured 3 men already, and $500. "I have the money," Finn assured her. "And as for the horse, I've been watching him in the corral. He's challenging, but not impossible." He smiled at her worried expression. "Besides, I couldn't think of a better cause than your school building." "This isn't about the school," Zoe said, seeing through his explanation. "This is about Frank Wilson marking his territory." Finn's expression grew serious. "Maybe partly, but it's also about me proving I'm not the same young man who left 5 years ago. I've learned things, Zoe. Become someone who can be depended upon." He gently took her hand. "Someone worthy of a second chance." The touch of his fingers against hers sent warmth spreading up her arm. "You have nothing to prove to me, Finn." "Perhaps not," he said, "but I have plenty to prove to myself." The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with anticipation. News of the wager spread through Clearwater like wildfire, with most townsfolk placing side bets on the outcome. Opinion was divided. Frank Wilson was a respected rancher whose family had been in the territory for decades. But Finn had demonstrated remarkable skill with even the most difficult horses. Every day after school, Zoe found herself drawn to the livery stable, where Finn worked patiently with the massive black stallion. Thunderbolt lived up to his name, unpredictable and explosive, but Finn approached him with steady calm, never showing fear or frustration. "The trick," he explained to Zoe as she watched from a safe distance, "is to understand what he's afraid of. He's not mean, he's terrified. Previous handlers used force, which only confirmed his fears." "What is he afraid of?" Zoe asked, fascinated by the horse's powerful presence. "Confinement," Finn said, moving slowly around the corral as the stallion tracked his movements with wary eyes. "Someone trapped him in a small space once, probably trying to break him too quickly. Now he panics whenever he feels restricted." Day by day, Finn built trust with the animal. He began by simply sitting in the corral, letting Thunderbolt approach on his own terms. Then came gentle touches, bridle work, and finally, brief moments in the saddle that gradually extended to longer rides within the enclosed space. By mid-December, Zoe wasn't the only spectator. Townsfolk regularly gathered to watch the sessions, marveling at the transformation in the once wild horse. Frank Wilson himself appeared occasionally, his expression growing increasingly grim as he witnessed Finn's progress. One evening, after a particularly successful session where Thunderbolt had allowed Finn to ride him in figure eights around the corral, Zoe waited as Finn brushed down the stallion and fed him an apple. "He's magnificent," she said, admiring the horse's gleaming coat and proud bearing. "He reminds me of you," Finn replied, securing the stall door. Zoe raised an eyebrow. "I remind you of a 1,000-pound animal with a tendency to kick," Finn laughed. "I meant his spirit, strong, independent, cautious about trusting." His expression softened, beautiful beyond words. The compliment brought heat to Zoe's cheeks. Over the past weeks, their relationship had deepened into something that felt both familiar and entirely new. The ease between them had returned, but it was now layered with a mature understanding that their younger selves had lacked. "Would you join me for dinner tonight?" Finn asked suddenly. "At the hotel restaurant. I know it's not much, but I'd like that," Zoe interrupted, surprising herself with how quickly she accepted. The hotel restaurant was Clearwater's finest establishment, with actual tablecloths and a cook who had trained in Denver. As they entered, Zoe was conscious of the curious glances from other diners, but for the first time, she found she didn't care what people might think or say. They were seated at a corner table, a candle flickering between them. The light danced across Finn's features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. "I've been meaning to ask," Zoe said as they waited for their meal. "What will you do after the wager is settled? Will you stay in Clearwater?" Finn regarded her thoughtfully. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay." The implication was clear in his steady gaze. Zoe looked down at her water glass, gathering her thoughts. "Finn, these past weeks have been unexpected. When you first returned, I was certain nothing could bridge the gap between us. Too much time had passed, too much hurt. And now," he prompted gently when she paused. "Now I find myself looking forward to seeing you each day," she admitted. "Wondering what you'll say, what new story you'll share. It's as if I'm getting to know you all over again." "Is that a good thing?" Zoe met his eyes. "I think it is. The man you've become, he's someone I admire, someone I could trust my heart to, perhaps, if I were brave enough." Finn reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You're the bravest person I know, Zoe Montgomery. You built a life here on your own, earned respect and independence in a time and place where women are expected to depend on men. Whatever happens between us, I want you to know how much I admire the woman you've become." His words touched something deep within her, a recognition that he truly saw her not just the girl he had loved, but the woman she had fought to become. Their dinner arrived, momentarily interrupting the intensity of the moment. They ate and talked of lighter matters: his progress with Thunderbolt, her students' preparations for the Christmas pageant, the latest letter from his mother in Kentucky, who was considering a visit in the spring. As they finished their meal, the restaurant door opened to admit Frank Wilson and two companions. The rancher spotted them immediately, his expression darkening as he made his way to their table. "Miss Montgomery, Calloway," he greeted them, his tone clipped. "Quite the cozy scene." "Good evening, Mr. Wilson," Zoe replied evenly. "Are you joining us for dinner?" "Just stopped in for a drink," Frank said, his eyes fixed on Finn. "Thought I'd check if our arrangement still stands. Christmas is only a week away." "It does," Finn confirmed calmly. "Thunderbolt and I will be ready." Frank's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "Good. The whole town's looking forward to the spectacle. Let's hope it doesn't end with you in Doc Miller's office, or worse." After delivering this thinly veiled threat, he moved away to the bar with his friends. "He still has feelings for you," Finn observed quietly. Zoe sighed. "Frank proposed because I was suitable, educated, respected in town, young enough to bear children but old enough to run a household properly. It wasn't about love, not really." "For him, maybe," Finn said. "But I recognize the look of a man watching another man court the woman he wants. There's genuine feeling there." "Perhaps," Zoe conceded, "but I never encouraged it. I was honest with him from the beginning about my limitations. Limitations. My inability to love him as he deserved," she clarified. "It wouldn't have been fair to accept his proposal knowing my heart wasn't fully engaged." Finn studied her face in the candlelight. "And now, is your heart engaged elsewhere?" The question hung between them, fraught with possibility. Zoe took a deep breath, deciding honesty was the only path forward. "I think perhaps it is," she said softly, "though I'm still afraid to trust it completely." Finn's smile was gentle. "I can live with that answer, for now." As Christmas approached, excitement in Clearwater reached a fever pitch. The wager between Finn Calloway and Frank Wilson had become the main topic of conversation in every shop and home. Merchants did a brisk business selling ribbons and decorations, as people prepared both for the holiday and for the spectacle that would take place in the town square. On Christmas Eve, Zoe found herself unable to sleep. Tomorrow would determine so much, not just the outcome of a foolish bet, but perhaps the course of her future. The thought of Finn attempting to ride Thunderbolt around the square still filled her with dread, despite the progress they had made. She rose early Christmas morning and dressed in her best blue woolen dress with the lace collar. The day dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp winter morning that made the mountains seem close enough to touch. By 10 o'clock, nearly everyone in Clearwater had gathered in the town square. A makeshift corral had been erected at one end, where Sam Jenkins and two stable hands were trying to contain an agitated Thunderbolt. The massive black horse snorted clouds of steam into the cold air, his eyes rolling as he pawed at the ground. Zoe scanned the crowd until she spotted Finn talking with Mayor Simmons near the courthouse steps. He was dressed simply in his usual work clothes, but he had added a new hat and polished his boots to a mirror shine. When he saw her approaching, his face lit with a smile that warmed her despite the chill. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her. "Merry Christmas," she replied, unable to disguise her concern. "Finn, the horse seems particularly agitated today." "Perhaps this could be postponed, or it's going to be fine," he assured her, taking her gloved hands in his. "Thunderbolt and I have an understanding now." "An understanding won't matter if he throws you and stomps you into the dirt," Zoe said, her worry making her blunt. Finn chuckled. "Such faith in my abilities, Miss Montgomery." Before she could respond, Frank Wilson arrived with several of his ranch hands. The crowd parted to let them through, murmurs rippling as people noted the rancher's confident swagger. "Calloway," Frank called. "Looks like you haven't run off yet." "Ready to admit defeat." "Not today, Wilson," Finn replied pleasantly. "Beautiful morning for a ride, don't you think?" Frank's eyes narrowed at Finn's calm demeanor. "We'll see how beautiful it is when you're picking yourself up off the ground." He turned to the gathered townsfolk. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to settle our wager. The terms are simple. Mr. Calloway must ride that stallion around the town square without being thrown. If he succeeds, I'll donate $500 to the school building fund. If he fails, he pays me the same amount." Mayor Simmons stepped forward. "As the town's official witness, I'll judge whether the ride meets the terms. Mr. Calloway must complete one full circuit of the square, maintaining control of the horse throughout. Is that agreeable to both parties?" Finn and Frank nodded their agreement. The crowd began to shift, forming a wide ring around the square to give the horse plenty of room. Mothers pulled children back to safe distances, and men climbed onto wagon beds or porch roofs for a better view. As Finn moved toward the makeshift corral, Zoe caught his arm. "Be careful," she said softly. "Please." He touched her cheek briefly. "I will, and Zoe, whatever happens today, know that finding you again has been worth every hardship I've endured." With that, he strode confidently to where Thunderbolt waited, still snorting and stamping. The stable hands looked relieved to see Finn approaching. "He's in a mood today," Jenkins warned, holding the bridle while the horse tossed his head. "Something's got him spooked." Finn approached slowly, speaking in the low, soothing tone Zoe had heard him use during their training sessions. Thunderbolt's ears flicked forward at the familiar voice, though he continued to shift nervously. Moving with deliberate care, Finn took the bridle from Jenkins and dismissed the other handlers. Now it was just man and horse, facing each other in a moment of silent communication. Finn stroked Thunderbolt's muzzle, still speaking too quietly for the spectators to hear. Gradually, the stallion calmed, his breathing slowing as Finn worked his way around to the animal's side. With a fluid motion that made the difficult task look effortless, Finn mounted. Thunderbolt tensed but didn't buck, accepting the familiar weight on his back. A murmur of appreciation ran through the crowd. Even those who had bet against Finn had to admire his horsemanship. Mayor Simmons raised his hand. The circuit begins when horse and rider exit the corral. One complete trip around the square must be made without the rider losing control or being dismounted. Finn nodded his understanding, gathering the reins as Jenkins opened the corral gate. For a moment, Thunderbolt hesitated, eyeing the crowd warily. Then, responding to Finn's gentle guidance, he stepped forward into the open square. The next few minutes seemed to stretch into hours as Zoe watched Finn guide Thunderbolt at a steady walk along the perimeter of the square. The stallion was clearly nervous among so many people, his steps high and tense, but Finn maintained perfect control, his body moving in harmony with the horse's motions. They had completed 3/4 of the circuit when disaster nearly struck. A young boy, excited by the spectacle, darted forward from the crowd directly into their path. Thunderbolt reared in alarm, his front hooves pawing at the air as the crowd gasped collectively. Finn reacted instantly, shifting his weight and speaking firmly to the startled animal. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed certain he would be thrown. Then, remarkably, Thunderbolt settled back onto all fours, still trembling but once again under control. The boy's mother rushed forward to pull her son back, apologizing profusely. Finn merely nodded, his focus entirely on keeping Thunderbolt calm as they continued their progress around the square. As they approached the starting point once more, a palpable tension gripped the crowd. Just a few more yards and the challenge would be met. Frank Wilson stood rigid, his face a mask of disbelief as Finn guided Thunderbolt past him to complete the circuit. Mayor Simmons stepped forward with a broad smile. "The terms have been met. Mr. Calloway has successfully ridden Thunderbolt around the town square without incident." A cheer erupted from the spectators. Hats were tossed into the air, and people surged forward to congratulate Finn as he dismounted. He acknowledged their praise with modest nods but kept one hand on Thunderbolt's bridle, ensuring the horse remained calm amid the celebration. Frank Wilson pushed through the crowd, his expression tight but controlled. "A deal's a deal," he said, pulling an envelope from his coat. $500 for the school fund." Finn accepted the envelope with a nod. "Thank you, Wilson, it's a worthy cause." "You got lucky today," Frank said, his voice low enough that only Finn could hear. "But your luck won't last forever. Not in this town and not with her." Before Finn could respond, Frank turned and strode away, his ranch hands following in his wake. Zoe made her way to Finn's side, relief and pride mingling in her expression. "That was incredible," she said. "When that boy ran out, I thought." "So did I for a moment," Finn admitted, stroking Thunderbolt's neck, "but our friend here surprised me. He's learned to trust, even in frightening situations." The symbolism wasn't lost on Zoe. She reached out to touch the stallion's muzzle, marveling at how the once wild animal now stood calmly amid the noise and commotion. "What will happen to him now?" she asked. "Jenkins has offered to buy him for the livery," Finn said, "but I've grown rather attached to him." He glanced at Zoe. "I thought I might keep him if I decide to stay in Clearwater permanently." The question in his statement was clear. Zoe met his gaze steadily. "I think Thunderbolt would like that. He seems to have found a home here." Mayor Simmons approached, beaming as he shook Finn's hand vigorously. "Outstanding display of horsemanship, Mr. Calloway, and what a generous contribution to our school building fund. We'll have those new classrooms built by spring at this rate." As the mayor continued extolling the benefits the money would bring, Finn handed Thunderbolt's reins to Jenkins and asked him to return the horse to the stable. Then, taking advantage of a momentary lull in the mayor's enthusiastic planning, he turned to Zoe. "Would you walk with me? I have something I'd like to discuss with you, in private." Curious, Zoe agreed. They made their excuses to the mayor and slipped away from the still celebrating crowd, walking toward the creek where they had found their initials carved in the old cottonwood. The day remained bright and cold, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. Fresh snow from the previous night crunched beneath their boots as they followed the familiar path to the creek bank. When they reached the massive tree, Finn stopped, turning to face Zoe with an expression that made her heart quicken. "I've been carrying something with me for a very long time," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. 5 years, to be exact." Zoe's breath caught as he withdrew the small package wrapped in the handkerchief she had seen once before. With careful movements, he unwrapped it to reveal the simple gold band. "I bought this the day before I was supposed to leave Colorado," Finn explained, holding the ring between his fingers so it caught the winter sunlight. "I had saved enough for our start in life, had my ticket purchased for the stage home. I plan to ask you to marry me the moment I return to Clearwater." Zoe stared at the ring, emotions welling within her at the thought of all that had been lost, all the years that could have been theirs. "Fate had other plans," Finn continued. "The attack, my injuries, the long separation, they changed us both. Perhaps they even broke us for a time." He took a deep breath. "But standing here now, I believe they also made us stronger, more capable of understanding what truly matters." He took her hand gently. "I'm not asking for an answer today, Zoe. I know trust takes time to rebuild and we're still finding our way back to each other. But I want you to have this ring as a promise that I will never willingly leave you again, that my heart has been and always will be yours alone." Tears blurred Zoe's vision as she looked at the man before her, no longer the impetuous youth who had ridden away seeking fortune, but a man tempered by hardship and determined by love. The fears that had kept her heart guarded began to dissolve, replaced by a certainty she hadn't felt in years. "Finn Calloway," she said, her voice steady despite her tears, "I don't need more time. The truth is, my heart recognized you the moment you rode back into town, even as my mind tried to deny it." Hope brightened his face. "What are you saying, Zoe?" "I'm saying yes," she replied, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes to your promise, yes to the future we were meant to have, yes to rebuilding what was lost." With fingers that trembled slightly, Finn slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand alone. "I love you, Zoe Montgomery," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you every day since I left, through pain and distance and years of searching. I will love you for all the days we have left." "And I love you," she whispered, the words she had kept locked away for so long finally finding freedom. "I never stopped, not really. Even when I thought I hated you for leaving, the love was still there, waiting." He drew her into his arms then, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of homecoming and new beginnings. The years of separation melted away as they held each other beneath the tree that had witnessed their first love, now bearing witness to its renewal. When they finally broke apart, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Zoe." She smiled up at him, joy replacing the sorrow that had lived too long in her heart. "Merry Christmas, Finn." Spring came to Clearwater in a burst of wildflowers and promise. The townsfolk had quickly embraced the news of Finn and Zoe's engagement, most claiming they had known all along the two were destined to reunite. Even Frank Wilson had eventually offered grudging congratulations, though he soon after announced plans to expand his ranching operations farther north. As the last snows melted from the mountains, construction began on both the new schoolhouse and the small house Finn was building on a piece of land he had purchased at the edge of town. Using the carpentry skills he had honed during his years of traveling, he worked alongside the hired builders, determined to create the home he and Zoe had once dreamed about. Zoe continued teaching, but now her afternoons and evenings were filled with wedding preparations and planning for their future. Finn's mother had arrived from Kentucky in April, a sprightly woman whose immediate affection for Zoe had sealed the bond between the families. On a perfect June day, with the mountains standing as silent witnesses, Finn and Zoe were married in the town square, surrounded by nearly every resident of Clearwater. Mayor Simmons performed the ceremony, beaming with pride as if he personally had arranged their reconciliation. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," he proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Calloway, you may kiss your bride." As Finn drew her into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, Zoe felt the last pieces of her heart mend completely. The journey had been longer and more difficult than either of them could have imagined when they first fell in love, but it had led them here, to this moment of perfect certainty. The celebration continued well into the evening, with dancing and feasting beneath lanterns strung across the square. As twilight deepened into night, Finn led Zoe away from the festivities toward their new home, which had been completed just days before. "Ready, Mrs. Calloway?" he asked, lifting her into his arms as they reached the front porch. "More than ready, Mr. Calloway," she replied, her arms circling his neck as he carried her across the threshold. The house was everything they had once dreamed of: 2 stories with a wide porch, rooms filled with simple, well-crafted furniture, and windows that captured views of both the mountains and the town. But more than the physical structure, it represented the future they had almost lost, now reclaimed through perseverance and love that had proven stronger than time or distance. Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Zoe traced the scar along Finn's jaw, the visible reminder of all he had endured to find his way back to her. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That I'm grateful," she answered honestly. "Even for the pain and separation, without them we might never have known how strong our love truly is." Finn gathered her closer. "When I was lying wounded in that ravine, certain I was going to die, my only regret was leaving you without saying goodbye. I made a promise then that if I survived, I would spend the rest of my life finding my way back to you." "And you kept that promise," Zoe said, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "Against all odds. Some promises are meant to be kept," Finn replied, echoing words he had spoken months before beneath the old cottonwood. "Some loves are meant to endure." As they drifted towards sleep in each other's arms, Zoe thought about the girl who had stood frozen on the boardwalk last autumn, disbelieving the sight of a long-lost love returning. She had believed he would never come back, had built a life around that certainty. Yet the cowboy had ridden back and proven her wrong, showing her that some bonds cannot be broken by time or distance, or even by the misunderstandings that separate hearts. Their story, she realized, was not just about second chances. It was about faith rewarded, patience vindicated, love proven true in the crucible of years and hardship. And now, in the home they had created together, they would write the next chapters of that story not as 2 separate souls finding their way back to each other, but as partners facing whatever life might bring, secure in the knowledge that some loves are simply destined to be. 1 year later, the summer sun bathed the porch in golden light as Zoe rocked gently in the chair Finn had crafted for her last Christmas. Her hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach, where their first child had just made its presence known with a flutter of movement. Across the yard, Finn was teaching a neighbor's son how to properly groom Thunderbolt, who had become something of a local celebrity after the Christmas ride that had cemented Finn's place in Clearwater. The once wild stallion now stood patiently as the boy carefully brushed his gleaming coat, occasionally nickering softly when Finn offered praise. The past year had been everything Zoe had once dreamed of and more. Their home had become a gathering place for friends and students, with Finn's mother deciding to stay in Clearwater permanently, taking a small house in town where she had quickly become a beloved figure, known for her storytelling and exceptional pies. Finn had partnered with Sam Jenkins to expand the livery into a proper horse breeding operation, focusing on training rather than breaking, using the gentle methods he had perfected with Thunderbolt. Their reputation had spread throughout the territory, bringing a steady stream of business and establishing Finn as one of the most respected horsemen in Wyoming. Zoe continued teaching, though she planned to take a break when the baby arrived in the fall. The new schoolhouse, built partly with Frank Wilson's reluctant contribution, had opened in March, providing bright, spacious classrooms for Clearwater's growing population of children. Life had settled into a rhythm of contentment that Zoe had once believed impossible. Each morning, she woke beside the man she loved, sharing coffee and conversation before they began their respective days. Each evening, they returned to each other, sharing the small triumphs and challenges that made up their life together. And on nights when the moon was high and the mountain air was crisp with possibility, they sometimes walked to the old cottonwood by the creek, where their initials remained carved in the ancient bark. There they would stand in the quiet darkness, remembering the path that had led them back to each other and giving thanks for the love that had withstood separation, doubt, and the passage of years. As Finn finished the lesson and sent the boy home, he looked up to find Zoe watching him from the porch. The smile that spread across his face, still boyish in its delight despite the maturity of his features, warmed her heart as it had since they were young. He crossed the yard to join her, kneeling beside her rocking chair to place a gentle hand on her stomach. "How are my two favorite people today?" "Active," Zoe replied with a laugh. "I think we may have a future horseman on our hands, or horsewoman. Either way, they'll be as stubborn as their mother and as reckless as their father," Finn teased, leaning up to kiss her. "Heaven help us," Zoe murmured against his lips. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Zoe thought about the day Finn had ridden back into her life, proving her wrong about so many things. She had believed second chances were the stuff of fairy tales, that love once lost could never truly be reclaimed, that her heart would always remain partially broken. In proving her wrong, Finn had given her more than just his love. He had restored her faith in possibilities, in the resilience of the human heart, in the power of a love strong enough to find its way home despite every obstacle. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, settling into the chair beside hers, their hands naturally finding each other as they had countless times before. Zoe smiled, squeezing his fingers gently. "I was thinking about how grateful I am that you never gave up, that you kept searching until you found me again." "Finding you was the easy part," Finn replied, his voice soft with memory. "Earning back your trust, that was the real challenge. You make it sound as if you had to tame a wild horse," Zoe laughed, Finn's eyes crinkled with amusement. "The comparison may have crossed my mind once or twice. You and Thunderbolt have a lot in common, beautiful, spirited, and wary of letting anyone too close. And yet you managed to earn both our trust," she observed. "With patience, honesty, and the absolute certainty that you were worth every effort," he answered, bringing her hand to his lips. "Always." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the clear Wyoming sky, Zoe and Finn remained on their porch, talking softly about plans for the nursery, names for their child, dreams for the future they were building together. The night air carried the scent of pine and sage, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, wild and free in the vastness of the territory they had made their home. Zoe had once believed Finn would never return, had constructed a life around his absence, had learned to stand alone against whatever challenges arose. Now, with his hand warm in hers and their child growing beneath her heart, she understood that sometimes being proven wrong was the greatest gift life could offer. The cowboy had indeed ridden back, bringing with him not just memories of the past, but the promise of a future richer and more fulfilling than either of them could have imagined in their youth. Their love story, interrupted but never truly ended, had found its proper continuation not in spite of the years apart, but because of them, because of the strength and wisdom those years had forged in both their hearts. As they sat together in the gentle Wyoming night, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had reclaimed, Zoe knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult or circuitous, lead exactly where they are meant to home, to the arms of the one person who makes your heart recognize its other half, even across the vast distances of time and separation. And in that recognition lies the greatest truth of all, that love, real love, never truly disappears. It simply waits, patient and enduring, for hearts to find their way back to where they've always belonged, together.